You probably would be looking at a jury trial next year. And so you're looking at, you know, certainly another year and a half of it not being fully resolved. I think Brad was just exuding confidence that it's over, meaning Ripple's going to win.
In today's video, attorney John Deaton discussed the latest with the SEC Ripple XRP lawsuit, the recent summary judgments from Ripple and the SEC, and what's next for the procedural process, likelihood of a settlement soon.
What are we looking at now? How much longer does the case drag on? You know, just ballpark, just to help people understand.
You probably would be looking at a jury trial next year. And so you're looking at, you know, certainly another year and a half of it not being fully resolved. Now, the question too then becomes, depends on what a ruling is, it could always be appealed. An issue could be appealed before it goes to the jury, right? Especially if both sides agree and she certifies it. So there's a lot of other legal issues in play. But if there wasn't a direct appeal on her decision and a jury came into play, yeah, there wouldn't be a jury this year. Like, the judge's trial calendar has already been determined.
Gotcha.
Johnny, one of the things I got to ask,
you're probably looking at, you know, fall of next year.
Brad Garlinghouse liked a tweet that the digital asset investor put out. The tweet said, "Dimes to dozens, this thing is over." And that's obviously in reference to the Ripple versus SEC case. So this is something you may not have a direct answer to, but I'd like to hear your conspiracy. Why do you think Brad Garlinghouse is liking tweets like this? He knows people like us are watching.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'd really love to know if Brad in any way regrets that, or if he's having fun or whatnot. Everyone reads that differently. I can tell you this, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but I don't believe the case has settled right now, and we're just waiting for some announcement. It's just not the way it's just not the way it works, right? And I know a lot of people think that I'm naive and I don't know what I'm talking about, that because Brad did that, the case is over and they're just waiting and working out some details. It's just not the way it is, in my opinion, obviously. So I think, speculating, I think Brad was just exuding confidence that it's over, meaning Ripple's going to win. That doesn't mean that, you know, the case is over technically and we're just ironing out some details, you know, but we'll see. I don't believe it's settled. I believe we're going to get a ruling. I think we're going to get the emails on June 13th, and we're going to get a decision shortly thereafter from her. And hopefully it's very good news. But I think at this point, Ripple is very confident in their chances.
John, so I know one of the biggest things we've heard Brad say was, hey, he would have been happy to pay a fine as long as secondary sales are not considered a security. That's really, at the end of the day, is that truly the outcome that Ripple's looking for? Is they just want those secondary sales to be blessed as non-securities?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously they also want their direct sales being non-securities as well, their ODL platform. But without secondary market sales being blessed, how do you truly get liquidity, you know, in the United States? And again, a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo or any bank that has these Nostra accounts where they pre-fund accounts in all these different nations and jurisdictions, for them to have the confidence that there's going to be no fines or no lawsuits from the SEC, they have to have clarity. So if in fact Bank of America is going to engage in ODL, as an example, or a Western Union or a MoneyGram, they need to know that they're not going to get sued and that there's a blessing. And so that's really, you know, what he's getting at. I think I said a long time ago, I said a year ago, that if the SEC went to Brad Garlinghouse and said, Brad, I'll tell you what, pay us $150 million, admit that Ripple violated the law from 2013 to 2017, and we will declare ongoing and future sales of XRP in the United States as non-securities. Brad would have written the check right then and there, instantly, right?
Yeah.
I think he would have. I think he might today write $100 million check. You know,
I think it'll depend on them Hinman meals at this point, right?
Right.
John, question for you. Let's talk worst case scenario, because I know everybody wants to know. Let's say the SEC comes out. I'm sorry, the judge comes out and rules in favor of the SEC that XRP is a security. Is it over for XRP, or what does that mean? Does it just, could they still use it on the ODL, and can it still work, or are they out of business? Help us understand what the worst case is.
That's actually a great question, man. It's a great question because remember, Brad Garlinghouse said that Ripple was already operating under a worst case scenario. So the SEC didn't seek a preliminary injunction in this case, like they did the Telegram case. So when they won Telegram, the judge signed an injunction and it stopped all activity. Here, all that would happen is we'd have the status quo and Ripple would appeal to the Second Circuit where they got a better chance. And we wouldn't have, I mean, I'm sure the price of XRP would take a hit, and like it did when the lawsuit, because of the bad news, and people would sell and all of that. But no, they would continue business, and we would get a ruling 2 years from now from the Second Circuit, which could then overturn Judge Torres's decision. Right. And if they lost at the Second Circuit, they could go another 2 years to the Supreme Court and then win there. In the meantime, their ODL program, I mean, their liquidity hub project wouldn't have XRP, but they would continue to be growing overseas and doing all those things. You know what I mean? And so, and then if that were to happen, I'm not going to go away. You know, I'm not going to just tuck my tail between my legs. Right. I would go to do what I did in the library case with Naomi Brockwell. And when we get to the penalty stage, I'd be like, Judge, you didn't mention secondary sales. You have to mention secondary sales. You know, here's another amicus brief on it. Can we be heard? You know, push the envelope to try to get her to do that. And because I see that, I think she's already sees that that's what would happen. She's aware of what happened in library. I think she'll address it up front so that she doesn't have to deal with that after the fact.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I know people are asking, you know, are you under gag order? Are you paid by Ripple attorneys? You wanted to give a little disclosure of like what your role is in the whole case.
Sure. I can tell you unequivocally, I am not paid by Ripple, never been paid by Ripple. No one from the XRP community has paid me. I've spent my own money. I had to hire a local attorney to help me in New Hampshire because I'm not a New Hampshire attorney. I'm funding all the operations myself. I know people are like, well, why would he do this? I'll tell you why. You saw people at the XRP Vegas. You know, I know it's corny as hell, man. And I'm going to try not to get emotional, but like, listen, I get gifts and shit all the time. Like nice. This is from an XRP holder, right?
Yep.
Who wrote me a card and I posted it on Twitter. I have it right here, you know, where it said, you know, just thank you for giving us a voice in a time where I was alone. I felt like I wasn't alone. And I would never violate that purity by saying, oh, Ripple, can you help pay me some money, right? Maybe there'll be some benefit down the road some way. I've gotten to meet a lot of people. I've been on Fox Business, but pretty soon you're going to learn, because I'm going to have something coming out that addresses these things. But you're going to learn that what people believe in reality are two different things, man. When I met Brad Garlinghouse at Consensus before XRP Vegas, it was 2 years ago. I was walking by the man. I saw him about 20 feet away. I'm not going to talk to him because we're in the middle of the case. All of a sudden I say, hey, I hear, hey, John. And I turn around and it's Brad. And he's just kind of joking, being like, hey, since we've never met, by the way, I'm Ripple CEO, Brad Garlinghouse. And we shake hands and he smiles, I smile, and he goes, no pictures. And I looked at him, I said, some moron will take a picture and then accuse me of being a Ripple plant. So that's what happens. And then I get on Twitter later and someone says, I know that Ripple is paying Deaton and blah, blah, blah.
Unbelievable.
The truth is, you guys are going to learn sometime in the near future. I actually argued quite a bit with the Ripple lawyers behind the scenes. And when I say argued, I mean, like, I was shouting a couple of times.
What was it about? What was it about?
We'd love to know, John, what you can tell us. I know you probably can't now.
Share some details.
No, I do share them, but like,
we'll bring you back.
Let's just say lawyers can disagree. They represent these two guys. And listen, I got nothing against Chris Larson and Brad Garlinghouse, but they'll be okay if they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right. The guy who's got his retirement tied up in iTrust Capital that's been frozen for 2.5 years, that's got all of his money in his retirement tied up. That's the guy I care about. So if I'm dealing with a lawyer who's got interest over this guy who might be a billionaire, and I'm talking about, you know, the regular Joe, sometimes our philosophies are slightly different. Let's just put it that way.
But I wanted to shift the conversation into an IPO conversation. The number one narrative around Ripple before they were sued by the SEC was that they were going to be launching on the New York Stock Exchange. And this week, we had an image circulating around Twitter where the NASDAQ was congratulating Ripple on their Medico acquisition. So I'd love to hear some thoughts from you. Are you anticipating an IPO sometime after this lawsuit?
Yeah, I think Ripple was on that path before this lawsuit. And I think that when they have complete clarity, you know, if they were to get a complete victory from the judge and that ended everything, I think you're looking at certainly within a year that Ripple would IPO. And I think that, you know, if they get clarity, I mean, the valuation, I know that's been a hot topic. I mean, here's the thing. Something that struck me as very unique is that Ripple bought out their Series 3 investors, and they valued internally Ripple at a $15 billion company privately. And so they paid their seed 3 investor. That was the Tetragon people. I think it was SBI as well. They basically bought those shares back at a valuation at 15 billion. So if they're self-evaluating themselves at 15 billion and they have 45 billion XRP, if XRP were to go to $2, that puts them at $100 billion valuation. To put that in perspective for your viewers, Coinbase is currently a $15 billion company.
Wow.
Now, I personally think Coinbase is undervalued because they got $5 billion in cash, and they're, you know, but with all this lack of clarity, I think that's why their stock has plummeted like a lot of other tech and other stocks. I appreciate it. And one thing I would say to my XRP family is that, you know, the higher burden is on us because, and I mean it this way, we've been fighting. I know how the XRP holder feels. Been fighting alone, right? For like 2 years. People were celebrating what the SEC did. Coinbase delisted XRP, Kraken delisted XRP. So I know a lot of people are like, man, it's a hard sell to like join with Coinbase who delisted XRP. But the words that you just said is you got to remember the enemy of my enemy is sometimes my friend. And the enemy is in fact the anti-crypto incumbent people in charge, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Gary Genslers, the Sherrod Browns, the Brad Shermans. These are the people that we're fighting against. And there'll become a time if we can get a level playing field, which is always what we wanted, then we can have let the best project win, let the best tech win. You know, if I own Bitcoin and I know my XRP maxis are like, oh, you got a dinosaur, that's fine. Then let the dinosaur, you know, die off. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but let's have a fair system. You know what I mean?
So John, when the dust settles in 2028, 2030, somewhere around there, and American litigation is set in stone, we have some regulation for digital assets. What are you anticipating? Do you think a lot of this new technology is going to end up going to the UAE and to China because they have friendlier regulation? Or do you think at the end of the day, crypto finds a home in the United States because regulation, it finally comes to fruition?
I think that crypto is already escaping the United States, and U.S. investors are being excluded with new projects because they don't want to have to try to spend millions litigating the SEC. But at the end of the day, I think it's several years away. I think when you have a market that represents 50% of all the world's capital, eventually it's going to be okay. And I think we're going to win. I think we're still in the middle of that fight, though. And hopefully we get a good victory from this case. In my opinion, this case, if the SEC wins, we're in for even more battle. If the SEC loses, we're still in for a battle, but I think they'll lose a lot of political credit, right? Like momentum. Gary Gensler keeps calling everything a security. If this judge rules XRP is not a security, now they've lost some momentum in that false narrative. And so we just got to keep fighting.